These are all my best tips and videos on car leasing. Enjoy. Today I'm going to be going over some very important things you need to know if you're going to plan on leasing a car. And this video is not the one you want to go to for should I be leasing versus should I be buying, what's the best option. I made a completely separate video just for that topic, so I'll link it at the top so you can go watch that video first. And if you need to, come back and watch this video. Because this video is going to be more focused on you need to know this versus need to know that, or make sure you don't do that and make sure you do this. Because I want you guys to be fully equipped with knowledge so that when it does come time for you to lease, nobody takes advantage of you. So let's jump right in. The first thing you need to do is to make sure you're leasing the right car. And when I say the right car, I'm not talking about necessarily the car you want, but more the car that has a really strong residual value. And the residual value is how much the car is going to be worth once your lease is over. So you want that number to be as high as possible. And the reason for that is because your monthly payment will be based on the depreciation of the car. So the higher the residual value, the lower the depreciation. Here's an example of how that works. So let's say the car you want is worth $30,000. And at the end of your 3-year lease, it's expected that same car will be worth $20,000. That $20,000 represents the residual value of the car, and that $10,000 difference represents the depreciation. So your lease payment is designed to pay off that $10,000 of appreciation over that 3-year period. So that's how a lease works. Now let's say you have another car worth $30,000 also, but its residual value after 3 years is expected to be $25,000. So because the residual value is higher, your lease would only be based on paying off that $5,000 of depreciation over that 3-year period. So of course, this would lead to a smaller monthly payment. And this is why you want to lease a car that has a high residual value. So if the residual value for the car is less than 50% at the end of your lease, it's probably not going to be a good deal. That means the car will be worth less than half of what it is up front. And I'm basing this off of a 36-month lease. Now an excellent lease would be with a car that has a residual value of somewhere between 55 to 65%. And that number is based on the MSRP. And that's the manufacturer's suggested retail price. So here's a visual of how different residual values can actually affect your monthly payment. Here you see a car worth $30,000 and it has a 65% residual value. That means when the lease is over, the car will be worth $19,500. So you take that $30,000 and subtract that $19,500 and that gives you a depreciation of $10,500. So that's going to be the number that your lease payment is based off of. So if you divide that by 36 months, your lease payment will be $292 a month. Now if you look at this example, you also have a $30,000 car, but this one has a 40% residual value. So now the residual value is going to be $12,000. So you subtract that $12,000 from the $30,000, that gives you a depreciation amount of $18,000. So now you're paying for more depreciation. So because you're paying for more depreciation over that 3-year period, it's going to equal $500 a month. So you can see clearly how the more depreciation you have, the more monthly payment you're going to have. So you can clearly see the importance of leasing a car with a higher residual value. So to find out the residual value, you can either check online or you can call and ask a dealer directly. Next, you don't want to sell or trade in your current car to the future leasing company. It's not the end of the world if you do, but them knowing you have a trade-in, which is considered cash, just gives them the upper hand. You have to understand that you'll be dealing with professional number crunchers here. So you don't want to give them any additional information up front that can be used against you later. I would personally recommend that you just sell your car to a completely different dealer ahead of time just to be on the safe side. And get offers from at least 5 different dealers just to make sure you get the best price on your car as possible. Next thing I want you to know is that everything when it comes to a lease is completely negotiable. And even though you're leasing a car and not buying it, you still want to negotiate the sales price. And the reason for that is because the sales price is the starting point for all the other costs to come. So the lower you get the sales price, the lower you get all the other costs too. You can also negotiate the term of your lease. The most common term is a 36-month lease, but you still have the option to negotiate if you want more or you want less. And try to keep the term in your lease to equal a full year amount. So stick to 24, 36, or even 48 months. And the reason for that is because if you lease a car for 39 months, you still have to pay the registration for the full year, even though you'll only be actually driving the car for 3 months out of that final year. And this is something I see quite often. Next thing you can negotiate is the actual mileage, because there'll be a set number of miles you can drive that car every single year. And this is important because the over mileage fees are extremely excessive. So have an idea of how many miles that you usually drive a year. That way you're not going to put yourself in a compromising position. But the most common number you see will be 12,000 miles a year. Now another thing you can negotiate with your lease is the money factor. So you have to pay close attention to this part. This is the number used with the car lease to represent the interest rate. And just like interest rates are important in everything else that you purchase, you want to treat the money factor with the same respect. So the money factor would be a number that looks like this, 0.00235. So just by looking at that number, you have no clue if that rate is considered to be high or low. So I'm going to teach you a trick to turn that weird looking number into a comparable interest rate. Because once you see that number converted over to an interest rate, you can tell right away if that's a high interest rate or not. So you'll definitely need a calculator for this part. You're going to take that money factor and multiply it by 2,400. And when you do that, you can now see that you're being charged a 5.64% interest rate. And based on where interest rates are at the time, will help you determine if that's considered a good rate or a not good rate. And I'd even recommend you do that math right in front of the salesperson because it lets them know you have an idea of what's going on. Because respect goes a long way. And that can definitely help limit the amount of disrespectful numbers they plan on putting in front of you in the future. Next thing you want to do is get all your quotes with zero money down. Because once you start putting money down, it gets harder to determine if the actual deal is a good deal or not. And right from the start, you want everything as clear as possible. So another tip for you that will help you determine if this is a good deal or not is to get your quotes with no money down for 36 months and have them put $12,000 as the mileage. And make sure they include the taxes and all the fees. And from all that, you'll end up with a monthly payment amount. Now take that monthly payment amount and divide it by the MSRP. So let's say your monthly payment was $600 and the MSRP for that car was $54,000. When you do the math on that, you'll end up with 0.01. Then take that 0.01 and multiply it times 100. And then you'll end up with 1.1%. And you want that percentage number to fall within 1 to 1.5% to be classified as a good deal. And obviously the lower the better. And don't allow them to manipulate your monthly payments by extending your lease term further than what it already is. Now the next tip is pretty straightforward. And that's do not put a down payment down for your lease. It is not required at all. The number one thing to keep in mind is that putting money down does not lower your overall cost. And it doesn't save you money in the long run the same way it would if you had a loan. And if you were to make a down payment and that car got totaled from an accident or got stolen, you would not get any of that money back. And the amount you're paying for the lease is already predetermined, so putting more money down is not necessary at all. And while we're on the topic of accidents, make sure you have gap insurance. That's something else that's important but also gets overlooked. It used to always be included in leases, but not so much anymore. That covers the amount above what the insurance company would pay out in case of an accident. Because without gap insurance, you'd be personally responsible for paying out that difference to the leasing company. And I'm sure that's the last thing you want to do. Next, don't wait till the last minute to start shopping around for your options when your lease is almost over. I would say start planning somewhere between 6 to 12 months before the end of your lease. Because if you wait till the last minute, you can get a bad deal regardless of whatever your plans are with that car. Because you'll need that time to shop around from different dealers, especially if you're trying to get into a new lease. Because the more dealers you speak to, the better you increase your chances of getting a better deal versus just going with the first person you speak to. And because of everything you learned in this video, plus your personal experience with the lease you're currently in, you'll be in a really good position to even shop online. So you won't physically need to go from dealer to dealer anymore. But either way, don't wait till the last minute. Now for this next tip, this may be the most important tip of all of them. And that's if you plan on turning your car in at the end of your lease, don't just go to the dealer, drop the car off, and just leave. That might be the worst thing you can do. Because believe it or not, you may have equity in your car. And I know it's not usual that you hear people talking about you may have equity in your car, but that's a huge benefit that comes along with leasing. Because remember, when you started your lease, you were given a contractual residual value. And that value states how much your car will be worth when your lease is over. So at the end of your lease, you can actually purchase that car for that set amount directly from the dealer. Now here's how you use that to your advantage. Just because the residual value states what you can purchase the car for at that specific time, doesn't mean that's how much the car is actually worth in the open market. Because when you get a lease, the dealer is assuming the future value of that car. But markets change, and so does car value. So before turning in your car, make sure you check the Kelley Blue Book value of your car. And if the current value is more than the actual residual value given to you by the dealer, you can actually sell your car for that current value. And when I say sell your car, I'm not talking about driving around with a for sale sign in your window or something like that. I'm talking about selling the car directly to the dealer themselves and walking away with a check. Because otherwise, they would just pocket the equity themselves, which is what they do most of the time because most people have no clue about these details. So here's what that looks like. Let's use that same example of the car being worth $30,000 with an expected $20,000 residual value. Over your 36-month lease, you would have paid off the $10,000 of depreciation. So before you go turn your car in, you actually check the Kelley Blue Book value and you see that your car is actually worth $23,000. You can literally sell the car directly to the dealer for that $23,000 price. So it would be as if you purchased the car for the $20,000 amount and immediately sold it to the dealer for the $23,000 amount. So when it's all said and done, you would literally walk away with a check for $3,000 directly from the dealer. And that's one of the most powerful tools about leasing. So that's a tip for if you plan on turning in your car, but I have a different tip if you plan on actually buying the car and keeping it for yourself. So if that's something you plan on doing, don't go back to the direct dealer you got the lease from, because they will do their best to add all kind of fees and probably jack up the price on you. So what you want to do is call the leasing company and ask for a direct payoff quote. And then you'll need to get financing from your bank or from your credit union and then pay the leasing company directly. This can save you a lot of headache and unnecessary fees. Now, if you're in a state that requires that you must go back to that same dealer, the workaround is that you can technically go to multiple dealers under the same manufacturer. So it still doesn't have to be that specific one you got the original lease from. But overall, just remember, when your lease is up, you have options. You can either buy the car, you can sell the car, you can trade in the car, or you can get a brand new lease. But now, regardless of whatever you plan on doing, you will be more equipped. So you're thinking about getting a new car, and you're not sure if it makes more sense for you to buy the car or if you should lease the car. Because you're constantly hearing some people say you should be buying your car, and then you hear other people saying you should be leasing your car. And it seems like both sides make really good arguments as far as what's best. Well, by the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of both options, and you'll have everything you need to know to make the right decision. I'm going to be going over all the pros, the cons, and when each option makes the most sense for you. And then what will happen is you'll end up becoming one of those people that are telling people which option is best for them. So let's get started. So buying a car is the most common way of getting a car. It's pretty much straightforward. First, you'll find a lender, which could be a bank, credit union, or any type of financing company. And that lender is going to be the one that actually pays the dealer for the car. And then you'll pay that lender back over time, typically with interest. So what this does is spreads the cost of the car over a period of time, which makes the car more affordable. For example, let's say you wanted a car and it's worth $30,000 and you decide you don't want to pay cash for it. So what you'll do is you'll find a lender that you can borrow the $30,000 from so you can actually purchase the car. Well, technically they'll be purchasing the car and you'll be paying them back. And let's assume the lender's going to charge you a 6% interest rate over a 3-year period of time. So using all those factors, your monthly payment will be $912.66. And you'll be required to make that payment to the lender every single month until that 3-year period is up. And that payment will include the principal amount that you originally borrowed, plus the interest rate on top of that. And the interest rate you'll receive is pretty much based on your credit worthiness and the length of the loan. And once you pay back the loan, you'll receive the title of the car, and then you actually own that car free and clear. Nothing more, nothing less. So now let's see how that compares to leasing a car. Now when it comes to leasing, it's not as straightforward as buying. Well, at least not until you fully understand the process. So car leasing is an alternative to buying the car. So when you lease a car, what you're essentially doing is just renting the car for the period of time. Usually that period of time is about 3 years. So during that period of time, you'll make monthly payments to the leasing company, and at the end of the lease, you'll either return the car or you'll purchase the car. And during that time, the leasing company is taking into consideration the depreciation of the car, and that's what determines your monthly payments. So car depreciation refers to the reduction of the value of the vehicle over time due to wear and tear, age, and usage of the car. So what they're really doing is estimating the car's residual value, so which is the car's expected value at the end of the lease term. So then it takes that value and then subtract it from the original value, and that determines what the depreciation will be during the period of time you lease the car. So let's use that same example of the car being worth $30,000. And the leasing company expects for the car to be worth $20,000 once your lease is over. So the depreciation of that car would be that $10,000 difference. So your monthly payment will only be based on that $10,000 of depreciation that's going to happen during your lease term. So in this example, your monthly payment will only be $431 a month during that 3-year period. And that's also assuming a 6% interest rate. Well, technically, leasing companies don't use the phrase interest rate. Instead, they use a phrase called the money factor. And that money factor just represents the amount of interest that you'll be charged during that period of time. So don't let that terminology throw you off. Also note that the longer the lease term, the more depreciation that will happen, which means your monthly payment will be higher. So once you really grasp the concept of depreciation and how that affects your monthly payment, the entire concept of leasing becomes a lot more clear. It's also important to note that all cars don't depreciate at the same rate. Factors like the make and model of the car, its age, the mileage, and market demand all impact the car's depreciation rate, because some cars just do a better job at maintaining their value. And another thing with leases is that most of them are what's called closed-end leases. And what that means is the residual value of the car is determined at the beginning of the lease. And that could be a good thing because you know exactly what the car will be worth at the end of your lease before you even drive off the lot. And that's important because even from day one, you can start planning on if you want to purchase the car at the end of your lease term. Okay, so now that we have understanding of what buying and leasing both look like, let's start looking at some pros and cons. One of the biggest advantages of buying a car is that you'll have physical ownership from day one. So you have to understand that because you have a loan, the lender actually holds the title of the car until you pay it off. However, even from day one, they typically don't put any restriction on what you can do and what you can't do with that car, which means you're in complete control. So if you decided you want to take your car and go paint it neon green, there's nobody that can stop you. And another benefit that comes with buying is that you can drive as much as you want, because there are people that love to just jump in their car and go. And you might be one of those people. And when you buy a car, you don't have to worry about any annual mileage restrictions or any fees associated with it. Another benefit to buying is that once that loan is paid off, your payments are literally done. So if you're able to keep that car years after that loan is paid off, you will literally be able to save all that money you were once putting towards that car note. And usually that's a substantial amount. And that money can now go towards any investments you want to do, or even maybe a down payment for a future home. Another thing you could do is you can always trade that car in to get a new car whenever you want. Because even though cars do depreciate in value, they still maintain some type of value. And whatever that car is worth will bring down your out-of-pocket expense when it comes to buying that new car. Another thing you'll be able to do is actually sell the car as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be traded in. You can sell the car in the open market and just pocket the cash. So just know that buying a car gives you quite a bit of flexibility. Now, when it comes to the downsides of buying a car, I would say one of the biggest downsides to buying a car is that it can get pretty expensive short term. Meaning that during the duration of your loan, you can expect your monthly payments to be pretty high. So what's happening is you're taking the full value of that car and getting it paid off in a few years. Not to mention, you'll also be paying interest and tax on that full amount as well. So side by side, your monthly payments are almost always higher when you're buying versus leasing. And of course, that's if we're referring to an equivalent car. So because of these higher payments, it'll have more of an impact on your overall monthly household cash flow. Another cost that you'll run into is your initial down payment. Some lenders require you make a down payment just to qualify for the loan. And unfortunately, that's not always feasible. Another disadvantage to buying is the ongoing cost of maintenance and repairs. Because as the car begins to age, it will require more and more maintenance and more repairs, and that can get pretty costly. And the last thing you want to be aware of is the depreciation. When you buy a car, the value of that car drops dramatically as soon as you drive off the lot. And over time, that car continues to lose more and more value. And eventually, it'll be worth just a fraction of what you originally paid for it. Now, when it comes to the benefits of leasing, first and foremost, leasing usually means a smaller monthly payment when you compare it to buying. Because when you lease, remember, you're only paying for that expected depreciation versus paying for the entire car, which means you could potentially afford additional features and benefits, giving yourself the most bang for your buck. Another advantage to leasing is that your car will always have the latest technology. So obviously, cars get more advanced every year, and when you buy a car, it's easy for it to get outdated. But with a lease, you'll get a brand new car every few years. And that means you'll always be driving the latest model with the newest technology. And this is something that can be very appealing for someone that loves to stay up to date with the latest gadgets and the latest features. Another thing that leasing will give you is a warranty that covers the car for the whole term of the lease. So as long as you don't go over the mileage or damage the car in any kind of way, you don't have to worry about any significant out-of-pocket costs. And in some cases, periodic maintenance is also included in the lease as well. Another benefit that leasing is going to give you is that when it's time to trade in your car, the process is extremely simple for you. You don't have to worry about selling the car or trying to negotiate the car's value. You simply just return the car to the dealer at the end of the lease or buy it at that predetermined purchase price. And this could be a big relief for people that don't want to have to worry about the hassle of trying to sell a used car. Additionally, leasing can also save you some money on sales tax depending on where you live. Because in some jurisdictions, you only have to pay sales tax on the amount you put as a down payment and whatever your monthly payments are. Versus when you buy a car, the tax is on the entire amount of the car. This is why leasing a car can definitely be a lot more affordable for someone. And lastly, when you lease a car, it's a smaller down payment versus if you were trying to buy that same car. And that's definitely appealing for someone that doesn't want to pay any upfront money. So now let's jump into the disadvantages of leasing. The first one is pretty obvious, and that's when you lease a car, you don't own that vehicle. The leasing company holds the title and you have no ownership interest in the car at all. So that means the leasing company can place strict limits on how you use the car and what you do to it. And if you don't follow the rules of that contract, that car can actually be repossessed. Another disadvantage to leasing is that you will always have a car payment, because when you buy a car and you pay off that loan, your payments will stop. But when you lease a car and that lease term is up, what will happen is you'll end up getting a brand new lease from scratch. And this means your monthly payments will be a lot more inconsistent versus if you were buying. Additionally, with vehicle prices rising, you can expect each new lease to be more expensive than your previous one. And that's something you definitely want to take into consideration. Another disadvantage to leasing is it comes with strict mileage limits, and exceeding those limits can be very costly. You actually pay for each individual mile that you go over that limit. And excess mileage charges can range from 15 cents to 40 cents per individual mile. And that can definitely add up quickly. So you'll need to have a reasonable estimate of how many miles you expect to drive before even thinking about getting the lease. Also, if you're the type of person that likes to customize your car, a lease definitely will not work for you, because most leases require that you return the car in the same condition you took it in, with the exception of reasonable wear and tear. This means you can't make any modifications to the car that you know you won't be able to undo before you take it back. Another disadvantage to leasing is that you don't get any cash when you turn your car in. Typically, when you turn the car in, you'll walk away with nothing, and that's regardless if you made a down payment or not. Instead, you may end up having to pay for things like excess mileage, excess wear and tear, or disposition fees at the end of your contract. And lastly, you have to understand that a lease is a binding contract, which means there could be surprise costs that do come up at the end of your lease. Estimating how much you'll have to pay because you know you went over your mileage will be pretty straightforward, but it's not as easy to determine how much you have to pay if they consider the car to have excess wear and tear. So now that we have the pros and cons out the way, now it's time to determine when leasing makes the most sense. So if you're the type of person that loves the idea of always driving a new car, lease may be a great option for you. Because remember, when you lease, you literally get a new car every few years, so you'll always have the latest and greatest technology and the newest model car. Leasing also eases your monthly costs and makes it a lot more manageable. So this may allow you to drive the type of luxury car that you probably wouldn't be able to afford if you were trying to buy it. So if that's something that interests you, then leasing may be best. Additionally, if you don't have to worry about any repairs, leasing may also be the best choice for you, because most cars that you lease will still be under the factory warranty, which significantly reduces the chances that you ever have to pay out of pocket when some type of repair may come up. And that could definitely give you peace of mind knowing you're not going to run across any of those type of unexpected expenses. Also, if you don't have the money for a large down payment, leasing will also be a better option for you. Because remember, you're only paying for the depreciation of that car, so any down payment you make would only have to go towards that smaller amount, which essentially keeps more money in your pocket. Now here's where buying makes the most sense. So if you're the type of person that likes to take road trips, or you know you're going to put a lot of miles on your car, you're definitely better off buying versus leasing. Because when you lease, remember, you have a limit to how many miles you can drive, and if you go over that limit, the fees can be very excessive. But when you buy, you're in complete control of how often or how much you drive. Another thing is that if you know you can afford to put a large down payment on the car, it may make more sense to buy it versus leasing. Because when you put a large down payment on the car, you eliminate a lot of financial risk. And that may also allow you to have significantly lower monthly payments. Another thing is that if you plan on owning this car for a long time, if you buy it, you can save a lot of money over the long run. Because remember, every year you can keep that car after the payments are done, it's like you have a free car. So when it comes down to it, is it better to lease a car or is it better to buy a car? I want you guys to put in the comments which one you guys think is the best now that you know the pros and cons. Now, unfortunately, there's no one size fits all when it comes to this question. So when trying to figure this out for yourself, some things you definitely want to take into consideration are your financial situation and your driving habits. I would say those two hold the most weight when it comes to making that decision. Also take into consideration your monthly budget and how much you can afford to pay up front. And definitely do a calculation of how many miles you typically drive on an annual basis so you can see if it really makes sense one way or the other. And once you've decided on which route you want to take, I would advise using some type of lease versus buy calculator to see what the options look like on paper. And that's something you can easily find on the internet. And lastly, make sure you shop around for financing and compare rates to make sure you're getting the best deal possible. Don't allow yourself to be scammed when leasing a car. Unfortunately, it's more common than you think because leasing a car can be very complex. And the dealers know this, so they can use this to their advantage whenever they like. And I'm definitely not trying to imply that all car dealers are scam artists, but no matter what, I feel you should be knowledgeable about the process and what it entails. And also, when I'm saying scam, I'm not always referring to something that means it's absolutely illegal to do. But in my opinion, unethical practices, misleading people, and the bait and switch are all classified as scams to me. So I put together this top 10 list for you to look out for to make sure you don't get scammed when you're trying to lease your car. So the first thing to look out for is the money factor lie. The money factor is just the number that represents the cost of financing the lease. It's very similar to an interest rate, but it's expressed differently. It's usually expressed as a decimal number, and sometimes dealers use this number to make it seem like you're getting a better deal than you actually are. So what happens is the dealer presents you with a money factor associated with your lease. And we're going to assume the money factor is 0.004 in this example. So this will give you a visual of what an actual money factor looks like when it's actually expressed on paper. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with the money factor at all. The problem occurs when you're given this money factor as if it represents a 4% interest rate. And it's very easy to lead someone to believe that. And leading someone to believe that that money factor represents an interest rate is extremely wrong and is furthest thing from the truth. So to turn that money factor into an estimated interest rate, you're going to have to take that 0.004 and multiply it by 2400. And when you do that, you'll come up with an interest rate that's around 9.6%. And you can see that's more than double the 4% that was told to you. So now as you know the truth, you can make your own assessment if the 9.6 interest rate is something you want to move forward with or not. Now the next thing you want to look out for is the early termination fee. This is important because life always can take an unexpected turn, so you want to know what your options are when it comes to this lease. So you may simply ask the dealer, what happens if I actually terminate my lease early? And they may tell you have to pay an early termination fee somewhere between $200 and $400. And in your mind you may feel that's reasonable because you are terminating your lease early and giving them the car back. So you may feel that relieves you with some of the commitment and some of the risks that may be associated with you signing the lease. Because now in your mind, you have an exit strategy if everything hits the fan. Now the problem here is, although they did tell you about the early termination fee that's going to cost you a few $100s, they may not tell you about the early termination charge, which is completely different and completely not associated with the fee at all. The early termination charge is usually the difference between what you still owe on the lease and the current value of the car. So suppose your lease termination payoff is $16,000 and you're going to get credit for the value of the car, which is $14,000. Your early termination charge will be the $16,000 minus the $14,000. So out of pocket, you'd have to pay $2,000. And that's in addition to that early termination fee they told you about. And on top of that, the charge may include other fees like vehicle disposition fees and taxes. So just remember, the earlier you terminate your lease, the higher your termination charge will probably be. So now another area you want to pay attention to is your down payment or your trade-in. Now I made another video talking about why I don't recommend doing a trade-in or making a down payment, and I'll link it to this video. But in most cases, the dealer will allow you to trade in your car if you'd like to. Or maybe you still decide that making a down payment is the direction you want to head in. Either way, you want to pay close attention to the paperwork and the numbers behind the deal. Because as unbelievable as it may sound, a dealer can actually steal your trade-in or your down payment right in front of your eyes. So the process of altering the capital cost reduction of a lease is unfortunately a tactic that's been used widely to deceive people. So if you do have a trade-in or you plan to put down payment on your lease, it's critical that you make sure that your actual lease contract reflects you actually adding that money to the lease. So the capitalization cost of the lease should be reduced by how much the trade-in value is or how much you put down on the lease. But some shady dealers do not put that in the contract. So literally your contract will read as if there was no trade-in or no down payment that existed at all. So if you're only focused on looking at the monthly payments, it can be really easy to overlook that discrepancy, and the dealer just profits thousands of dollars depending on how much you put as a down payment or how much the car value was. So you have to review your lease contract and make sure all relevant information is included in the lease before you actually sign it. So now we're going to move on to the warranty scam. This is yet another tactic done by shady dealers to increase their profits at your expense. So what they'll do is simply add an extended warranty straight to your lease. And it seems like that makes perfect sense. Because of course, they don't want you to have to worry about ever paying out of pocket if something were to go wrong with that car. And I'm not against warranties at all. I actually think warranties are a really good thing to have. But what I am against is the fact that they don't tell you that an extended warranty is already included in your lease. So there's absolutely no point in paying for an additional extended warranty on top of that. And to make things worse, sometimes the warranty that they're charging you for is longer than the actual lease itself. Meaning if you have a lease that's 36 months long, they're not only charging you for a warranty that you don't even need, but they're charging you for a warranty that lasts 48 months. Which of course is more expensive, leading to more profits for the dealer. So you definitely have to be aware of this one. So the next situation you want to look out for happens when the dealer agrees to take over your current lease payments in order to close you on a new lease. Now this may lead to several potential issues because the dealer may make it seem like they're going to take on full responsibility for your current lease. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. So in reality, what the dealer's actually doing is just taking over the remaining payments that you have. And then they'll return the car back to the leasing company once the lease term is over. Now, if there are any problems that occur with that car when it is dropped off, like it's over mileage or there's damage, they're going to hold you personally accountable, not the dealer. Because remember, the dealer's actually taking possession of that car. So if it happened to get driven and it goes beyond the mileage, that's 100% on you, not them. Also, if the dealer fails to make the remaining payments or does not return the car back to the dealer as agreed, the leasing company will hold you responsible, not the actual dealer. And more than likely, the new dealer is going to find a way to incorporate those remaining payments into your new lease deal. Meaning they will not really be making those remaining payments. You'll be making those remaining payments plus the payments on your new lease. So it's very important to understand what could go wrong if this is something that you definitely want to consider. Now, the next thing that's on my list of unethical tactics are around your lease term. During the negotiation process, you'll be given several quotes on paper and verbally. And once you guys finally agree on a number that works for everybody involved, make sure you make a personal note of that somewhere. And the reason is because people are mainly focused on the monthly payment, and that's it. And because the dealer knows this, it's easy for them to adjust the final documents before it's time for you to sign them. So you may agree to pay $400 a month for 36 months. But on the paperwork you actually sign, you're going to pay $400 a month for 48 months. And more than likely, you won't recognize the discrepancy until the 36 months is up and it's time to turn that car in. And then you'll be forced to keep it for 12 months longer than you anticipated. And at that point, it won't even matter what was told to you inside the dealer verbally. Because unfortunately, the only thing that will matter is what's on the final paperwork that has your signature on it. And this is the ultimate bait and switch right here. Okay, so the next one I want to cover is just a flat out lie. And that's when the dealer is trying to make you believe they're giving you a better deal by saying you're not going to have to pay a security deposit. So what you must know is that the security deposit is already included in your lease. So what they really mean to say to you is that they're not going to charge you twice for a security deposit, which is so nice of them to do, right? Also, the dealer has the ability to zero out a fee and just add it back to the lease under a different name. So if you run across an area that says no charge at all, make sure you pay attention to see if it's added somewhere else under a different name. Now the next one falls under the same category as the previous one as a flat out lie. And this is a scenario where the dealer raises the MSRP of the car. And the MSRP is just the purchasing price of the car. And although you're not purchasing the car, the MSRP is still the foundation for all the cost of the lease. So the higher the MSRP starts at, the higher all the other associated fees will be. So what happens is the dealer alters the price of the MSRP after they've already done the negotiations with you. Now the law does require that the price of the car be listed in the contract, but a lot of times people don't even know what they should be looking for anyways. So as a result, the dealer can raise the MSRP by thousands of dollars and you won't even notice. And in an event you do catch a discrepancy and you do call them out on it, all they'll tell you is it's a mistake and they'll fix the paperwork right away. Now at that point, you know exactly what you're dealing with, so you can make a decision on what you want to do moving forward. Now the next thing on my list isn't necessarily a lie, but it's definitely setting you up for failure. Because you have to understand the dealer is going to use several tactics and almost anything they can do to get you into that lease. So one thing they may do is give you an unrealistic mileage limit. And the reason that's so bad is because they know for sure you're not going to drive less than that mileage, so you're going to be charged an excessive fee on every single mile you go over that limit. And unfortunately, the fees can range from 10 cents to 30 cents per individual mile you drive over the limit. And you'd be surprised how fast that can add up to hundreds of dollars and even thousands of dollars in fees once it's time to turn your car in. So with this, they're definitely playing a long game because they know they'll receive those excess fees on the back end of the lease. So if it seems like all of a sudden the dealer was able to lower the monthly cost of the lease, just be on alert that something may have been adjusted that may not work in your favor long term. And then we have the upselling of additional features. These are additional features added to your lease without you even having knowledge they exist. And these could be under several various categories. And I can't express to you enough about how important it is to actually take your time, don't feel rushed, and actually review your lease contract. And don't be afraid to ask questions at all, because whatever you sign is what you'll be locked into. So if nothing else, hopefully this video helps you understand that you will be dealing with professional number crunchers. So because of that, you have to understand you have to go into this situation as equipped as possible. And hopefully this video was able to help you a little bit in that area. Today we're going to be talking about leasing and credit scores. And I'm going to go over both scenarios with you. How your credit score affects your ability to get a lease, and how getting the lease affects your credit score. And if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you already know what a credit score is. But if not, I'll link a video in the description box that will go over what a credit score is and different ways of how you can improve it. So whenever you're in a situation where you're borrowing money for a major asset, your credit score would definitely always be a factor. And the same thing goes for car leasing. So the typical minimum credit score that most dealerships require is a 620. But it's hard to give you an exact number because everything can change from dealer to dealer and state to state. So just use that number as more of a ballpark figure. Now, a score anywhere between 620 and 679 is known to be what's called an acceptable credit score. But anywhere between 680 and 739 is what's considered ideal for most dealerships. So just know if your credit score is 700 or above, you're in a really strong position and you'll probably get the best lease possible. However, if you have a score below 660, you still have a chance of getting a lease, but it's very small. And in my opinion, I still suggest you give it a shot. But if you do decide to go for it with the lease knowing that you have a low credit score, you have to understand you'll be paying more money up front and more money over the long run. And that's because car leasing companies use your credit score to assess how much risk is involved by loaning you money. Because essentially that's what they're doing. So your credit score plays a significant role in their decision-making process. So what the lenders do is reduce the potential loss by charging higher rates to people with higher risk profiles. Because at the end of the day, their number one concern is just, if I give you this money, what's the chance of me getting it back? So they look at your past to see what your history has been like with other lenders to see if you paid them back, to see the likelihood of them getting paid back. Another thing that a low credit score can do to you is it can reduce the chances of you getting the actual car that you want, because the options available to you may be dramatically smaller. So if there is a specific make and model that you have your eyes on that you want, you probably want to take the time to improve your credit score before even trying to get the lease. And if you're in a situation where you don't have a credit score at all, the lenders don't have any way to verify if you're financially responsible, so that just puts you in the same scenario as people with bad credit. It's unfortunate, but it's true. It's also important to know that even though a credit score is really important, it's not the only thing they look at when it comes to determining if you can pay back this lease or not. One thing they'll look at is your income, because your income determines if you can pay back the lease or not. So the more money you make, the better situation you're in. They also like to see people with stable employment history, so the longer you've been working at your job, the better it's going to look for you. They'll also look at your debt to income ratio, and that's just a simple formula of taking all your monthly debt and dividing it by your monthly income. And you'll definitely be able to find the debt to income calculator anywhere online. All you have to do is Google it. So the higher the amount of debt you have, the more challenging it could be to get approved. And believe it or not, leasing companies also check your driving record. Since they know the vehicle is going to have to be returned in a few years, they want people with good driving records so it increases the chances of the car returning to them in good standing. And they look at a negative driving record as an indicator that you're not going to take care of the car. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where leasing may be a little challenging for you because of your credit score, I do have a few options for you. And I have to be upfront and tell you, these are not the most exciting options, but they are options, so I'm going to give them to you. And the first one is just to simply wait until you can actually build up your credit score. And depending on what you have weighing your credit score down now, can give you a good gauge of how long it's going to take to get it to an ideal score. Next option is for you to have someone with good credit actually be a co-signer for you. And the reason this works is because it reduces the risk to the leasing company. Because in their mind, if you don't pay them, they know they can come after the co-signer because the co-signer is going to pay them because they have good credit and they don't want to risk messing up their credit at all. And then the last option is not common, but it is possible, and that's a one-pay lease. This is where you make all your lease payments up front in one lump sum. And I know it may sound crazy, but it is possible, and there are some people that actually do it. So let's say you're getting a lease for 36 months and your payment is going to be $500 a month. You're just going to take that $500 and multiply it times 36, and the answer you get is going to be $18,000. So you have to cut them a check for $18,000 before they give you the keys to the car. Because one way the leasing company can eliminate the risk involved in potentially not being paid back is to get all the money owed paid all up front in one lump sum. Again, none of these options are really attractive, but I'm going to give them to you because it helps get the job done. So that's everything on the front end. And when it comes to the back end, yes, a lease does contribute to help building your credit. Both buying and leasing have similar impacts on your credit score. So whether you acquire a car from buying or leasing, they both add diversity to your credit history, which positively impacts your credit score. And when you show that you're financially responsible with juggling and managing different type of loans, it definitely helps your credit score. And of course, making all your payments on time does have an impact on your credit score as well. So if you're looking to lease a car, or maybe currently you're already in a lease right now, this is the perfect video for you because I'm going to show you step by step how to sell a car that you don't even own. And I know just hearing that sounds crazy, but once you're done with this video, you will have a clear understanding of exactly what it takes and all the steps that need to be in place in order to make that happen for yourself. And who knows, your next lease may end up making you a few $1,000s. So let's not waste any time and go ahead and get started. So before we understand how to sell a car that we're leasing, we have to understand leasing itself. So when it comes to leasing, it starts off with an MSRP. That's the manufacturer suggested retail price. So that's the price they're going to sell the car for. So that price determines everything moving forward when it comes to your lease. Like that's the starting point. Now, that starting point can be negotiated. That's a different video, but we're going to assume it's $80,000 for the MSRP to begin with. Then we have the residual percentage. So that's going to tell us when this car is brought back, when we're done with our lease, we're going to assume it's a 36-month lease. It doesn't matter what the term is, but when we bring the car back, there's a percent of value that's retained. So in this example, we're going to assume the car is going to retain 65% of its value. And this number is set already ahead of time. So you'll see that different cars have different residual percentages, which means some cars are better leases than others. But 65% is going to be our residual percentage. So we take that $80,000 and we multiply it times 65%. And what that gives us is the actual residual value. So this is the value of the car when we bring it back used. Hopefully it doesn't look like this. Hopefully you take care of it. But when we bring that used car back, the dealer already has an understanding of what the value of that car is going to be. So they're predicting in the future what the value is. And that's why that's going to work for you in a scenario, and you'll see in a second. But they're predicting what the car's value is going to be. So 65% of the $80,000 is $52,000. So when you bring that car back, they're going to understand that car is going to be worth $52,000. Now, at the same time, that means you can also buy the car for that residual value. So when you turn that car in, you understand that in your lease agreement, you can buy the car for the actual residual value. That's important. So remember, when you bring it back, it's worth $52,000, but that means you can also buy the car for $52,000 at the end of your lease. So now when we look at the difference between the MSRP, $80,000, and the actual residual value, which is $52,000, we're left with $28,000. That's the depreciation. That's how much the value is going to drop of that car. So when you lease a car, you're paying for that depreciation. You're paying for that $28,000. So that $28,000 is going to be spread out over a 3-month period, and that's where your payments are going to be based off of. Yes, there'll be some additional fees and things like that included, but that $28,000 is the foundation. So when you look at it, like how does the lease work, you're literally just paying for the value of the car that's going to be lost during the period of time that you have it. So when you bring it back, it's worth $52,000. When you took it off the lot, it's worth $80,000. So you're going to have to pay for that $28,000 of depreciation over that 36-month period in this example. It could be 48, it could be 2 years, whatever, it doesn't matter. But 36 months, you're paying off that lease, okay? So you have just graduated and you have your bachelor's degree when it comes to understanding leasing now. So now what happens when your lease is up? So the first thing you need to do is look up the car's market value. So the market value is what is the car worth right now? Because remember, that residual value is just an estimate of what the dealer thinks the car is going to be worth, but you, based on circumstances and things going on with the world and the economy, all affect pricing. So your market value is going to tell you what's the value of that car today, the day you look it up. Now, there are different sites you can go to look up the market value of the car. So I'm just going to give you two, and I think these two are really solid. I think these are the only two you actually need. So the first one is actually the Kelley Blue Book value. So you may have heard of that before. So just all you have to do is Google Kelley Blue Book value. It'll pop up. And when you go to the site, all you have to do is you'll enter your VIN number, or you'll enter the license plate number, and then you'll have to answer certain questions like how many miles, the wear and tear, does it have leather seats, is there a moonroof? So little specific details they'll ask about the car, and then it'll pop out an actual value of the car, and that's going to tell you what the market value of the car is currently. Now, another option when it comes to looking up the value is also Edmunds. So I recommend running both, because when you look at both, it'll give you a good gauge, right? It'll give you security. If one says it's worth 58, the other one says it's worth 59, you know the value is going to be somewhere in that ballpark, because again, it's not an exact number, But you know, if both of them have somewhere in the similar range, then the cars are going to be worth somewhere in that range. And same thing with Edmunds. It works the same way. VIN number or your license plate number, couple questions. You'll have to enter your email on both of these because they'll email you the results. Obviously, they want your email for marketing purposes to sell you stuff in the future. But it is what it is. They're going to provide a service. You provide your email. And that's how you'll get your results for the value of your car currently right now. Okay, so now we go back to the residual value. So we already know the residual value for the car is $52,000. Okay, so let's say Edmunds and Kelly Blue Book came out with the exact same rate, and they say the car's worth $62,000. What that means is we have $10,000 of equity in our car. So just like you have equity in a house, you have a house you buy for $500,000, and now it grows to $600,000 in value. You have $100,000 in equity in that house. Same thing with your car. The car's value, according to the dealer, is $52,000 when you turn it in, but the market value is $62,000. So you have $10,000 in equity in that car. So now you can see how it's starting to look like, okay, I see how this can be profitable when it comes to turning in that lease or selling that car to somebody. All right, so now you know you have equity in the car. So that's the first step. So then you move on to the next step. Now you want to contact your leasing company. So when you contact your leasing company, there's some things you definitely want to ask them. For one, is early lease payoff an option? Because you technically don't have to wait till your lease is up. So let's say you have 9 months left on your lease and you decide, okay, I want to sell it. You look at the market value and you see the market value is higher than what the residual value is. You can actually sell it or pay it off early, but you're going to have to ask the leasing company, is that even an option? Because every leasing company has its own rules, but you want to check to make sure it's an option to pay it off early. If not, you're going to have to wait to the end of the term. Next question is third-party lease payoff an option? Can it be from a third party? Meaning, do you have to pay off the lease yourself, or can you get a third party to write a check to pay it off on your behalf? Then you have, what is the lease payoff amount for you? So if you were to pay off the lease, what's the amount that they need? It's going to be the residual value. And let's say you have 9 months. They're going to calculate the 9 months of payments that you would have to make, plus whatever fees they're incorporating with the whole payoff. So what is the lease payoff for you personally? Then what is the third party lease payoff amount? So if somebody else was to write a check to you, Mr. Leasing Company, is it the same amount as if I wrote a check? Typically it's not going to be, because realistically most dealers want the car back. So you'll probably get a better deal if you were to pay off the lease yourself personally versus them knowing there's a third party that's going to pay it off. And now that car could potentially be on someone else's lot, which is their competition. But those are the 4 questions you want to get answers to when it comes to your lease. So that's step 2. You call them and ask them each one of these questions and get clear on what the actual answer is. Next, you want to look at your selling options. So option number 1 is you can sell it to an individual. That's just the person. Someone on the street, you market it. A friend, neighbor, referral, it doesn't matter. But that's just an individual person that you can sell the car to. So that's one option for you. Next option is selling to a third-party dealer. So that's like another dealer that'll get involved, and they'll be the one writing the check to the leasing company, and they'll be the one actually taking the car. So that's another option for you. And option 3 would be selling to your dealer directly, the dealer that you got the car from, selling it back to them. So those are your 3 options when it comes to selling a car. So it could be to an individual person, it could be to a third-party dealer, or it could be back to your original dealer themselves. And then we have some really important considerations. So one is the potential sales tax on purchases. Because you have to understand, if you're selling it to an individual, that means you'll more than likely have to buy the car or buy the lease out and then sell it to them. So they'll write you a check, you'd write a check, and then you have to give the car to the person. So the person will be waiting in limbo for you to give them the car. But you may incur a sales tax. So you'd have to check, because depending on what state you're in or depending on your lease agreement would determine if you're going to have sales tax added to your actual purchase. So if so, you want to make sure you include that into the price, because you don't want to get hit with any unnecessary taxes if you don't have to. Next thing you want to consider is selling to individuals is the most profitable. So although it's a lot more work to sell to an individual because you have to find someone, it's going to be hands down the most profitable because you control the price. So with more legwork comes more opportunity to make more money. So you just have to understand, It's going to be harder to sell to an individual, but you'll make more money selling to an individual. Next is get a contract from the third-party dealers. So when you're dealing with a third-party dealer, they're going to write the check directly to your current dealer, and you're going to be the one waiting in limbo because they're going to cut the check for the payoff. Then they're going to give you a check for the equity, but they're not going to give you your check for the equity until they have the car in their name, right? So that's important to know. Yes, it's great to be trusting of people, but this is probably not the circumstances where you want to do that. So you want to have a contract that states they're going to pay you the equity amount once the deal settles and they get the car in their name. So you don't want to just be hoping and wishing that they're going to cut you your check once they receive the car, because they're going to buy the car directly from the leasing company. They're going to buy it out, and then they're going to cut you a check for whatever the equity is. And then we have selling to the original dealer. This is the most convenient. So you just go in there and tell them you want to buy the car. They know how much the car is worth. They know the residual value. So instead of all these extra transactions, they do it all in one. Because technically, no matter what, you're buying the car and then you're selling it to them. But they kind of just do it all together. They know you're buying the car for a certain amount. They're buying it from you for a certain amount. So literally, they just cut you the check. So it's the easiest process. Probably won't be the most profitable, but it's the easiest process to go back to the dealer and say, hey, my lease is up. I want to sell it to you guys. And it's like, great, we'll buy it. This is the residual value. This is the market value. Your equity is $10,000, but they're going to work a deal out with you. And then you probably leave with, I don't know, a $7,000 check or something like that. But that's how the process is. So when it comes down to it, just understand you're buying the car for the residual value and you're selling it for the market value or somewhere in the range of the market value. So that's how you take a lease and actually sell it to someone, third party, or back to the dealer. So I hope this video helped. Give it a thumbs up. Put a happy face in the comment section if the video helped you at all in any kind of way. That way YouTube knows this was a decent video and they'll send it out to more people, because again, I think more people need to understand how this works, because if you take your car back and you don't know how this works, the dealer's the one that's just going to pocket the equity. They're not going to ever go out their way to tell you, hey, you have equity in this car. They're going to pocket the equity, and that happens more times than you could think of. Now, if you're looking to lease a car, there's some key areas you definitely want to understand and be aware of, and I'm going to go over 5 today. So the first thing I would say you need to understand is what you're actually paying for, because a lease is not like buying a car. It is complicated. So when you lease, what you're paying for is the actual depreciation of the car. So let's say the car is worth something now, and you're going to use it for, let's say, 3 years. And when you bring it back, it's going to be worth less. So that difference is the depreciation, and that's what you're going to need to pay for. So for example, let's say the car is worth $50,000 when you're buying. That's the MSRP. And you're going to have this lease for 36 months. And when you bring it back, the value of the car is going to be worth $30,000. So it's $50,000 now, but when you bring it back, it's going to be worth $30,000. That difference is the depreciation of the car, because now the car's value has dropped by $20,000, and that's exactly what you're paying for. So you're paying for that $20,000 of depreciation over the next 36 months, 48 months, or however long the lease term is. That's what you're going to be paying for over that period of time. So now that we have that part out the way, now you can decide, is it better to lease a car or better to buy the car? So here's some simple questions you can ask yourself to help gauge which one makes the most sense. First is, how long do you plan on keeping the car? So if you plan on keeping the car 2 to 4 years, leasing may make the most sense. But if you plan on keeping it more than 4 years, you probably want to buy that car, because leasing a car longer than 4 years makes no sense financially. Next is, are you okay with always having a car payment? Because the truth is, once the lease is over, you don't have a car. And if you need another car, you're going to have to buy or lease, and you're back in a scenario. And if you continue to lease, you'll never own the car, and you'll constantly have a car payment. So if that's something you're okay with, leasing may be fine. But if not, you probably want to look at buying. Next, you want to decide what's more important to you, luxury or practicality. And I'm going to say this, and this is not a fact at all, but from my experience, typically luxury cars do not last a long time. And when it comes to the maintenance, it's very expensive. So if you want luxury, I think leasing may be the better option for you. And this next question requires a lot of honesty. How does your car look after a few years? So after a few years, does it look like you ran into the garage a few times? Or maybe the inside of your car was the major arena for a cat fight or something like that, but you know the condition of your car after a few years. So if it's squeaky clean and looks brand new, then go ahead and lease a car. But if you know you have some challenges taking care of a car, you're probably better off buying, because you're going to get hit with tremendous fees when you try to turn that car in. And then lastly, do you like for your car to have the latest technology? So if you're a techie person and you want the latest buttons and gadgets in your car, you're probably better off leasing. So if you're still with me, you probably planted your flag that you're going to lease a car, so let's move forward with some numbers. So the first thing I would say that's critical for you to understand is the money factor. The money factor is the financing cost of a monthly lease payment. The money factor is essentially the portion of a monthly payment on a lease that is allocated to the financing cost of the lease. So pretty much what it's saying is that the money factor is equivalent to what an interest rate would be. So if you're looking for an interest rate on your paperwork, you will not find it. What you'll find is the money factor. So the money factor is expressed in a number like this. You'll have a decimal point and a bunch of numbers to follow. And I know that looks confusing, but I'm gonna give you a simple formula that can help you turn that money factor into a comparable interest rate. So you're gonna take this money factor and you're gonna multiply it by 2,400. That's just the mathematical number that was figured out to turn that money factor into a comparable interest rate. So when you do the math on that, that comes out to 8.57%. So now when you see that money factor, you can convert it to a comparable interest rate and you can determine if that interest rate is something that works for you or not. The next thing you want to be aware of that's really important is the mileage limit they give you. Because if you drive over that mileage limit, you're going to be charged a fee for every single mile. So let's say you get a lease and they're giving you 10,000 miles a year, but you actually drive 15,000 miles a year and you have that lease for a 4-year period of time. So every year you're going 5,000 miles over the limit they gave you and you have that lease for 4 years. That equals 20,000 extra miles on your lease. So let's say they charge you 30 cents for every mile you go over. You'll take that 30 cent, multiply it times 20,000. That means you'll have a $6,000 fee just for going over your mileage. So make sure that doesn't happen to you by paying attention to how many miles you normally drive any given year. So last tip I want to give you is something that a lot of people are not aware of, and that's that when your lease is up, you can actually sell your lease back to the dealer and make a profit. So here's what I mean. So remember when you got your lease, they told you that the residual value of your car would be $30,000. And remember, you're paying for the depreciation, but the value of the car will be $30,000 when you turn it back in. So they're projecting what it's going to be in the future. But let's say at the end of the lease, you check the blue book value of your car and the car is actually valued at $35,000 because things happen, inventory changes, but for whatever reason, your car is worth $35,000. They told you it'll be worth $30,000, but it's actually worth $35,000. You can actually sell that car back to the dealer for $35,000. They'll deduct the $30,000 residual, so you actually have $5,000 in equity that you can walk away with. So you literally turn the car in and you walk away with a check of $5,000, right? That's very important to understand. I actually made an entire video on that subject and I'll link it at the end. But those are the 5 things you want to be aware of, or at least know about if you're looking to lease a car. So I hope this was helpful. And like always, if you received any value from this video, put a happy face in the comment section. And of course, if you have a question, you can comment as well. But I appreciate you guys watching. Like, share, subscribe, do all those things, and I will see you in the next video.